The grand convocation of the Allied worlds was supposed to be a celebration of peace. The shining towers of Celion Prime glittered under the artificial sun, and inside the vast crystal hall, thousands of alien delegates gathered, each representing a world more advanced and powerful than the last. Colors shimmered across the air as holographic banners floated above their tables. Golden sigils, swirling symbols and shifting languages. Every race had come to display their strength, their knowledge and their pride. Every race, except one. In the far corner of the hall sat a single human. Commander Elias Rowe sat with quiet stillness, his dark uniform pressed but plain, his face calm and unreadable. Around him the others whispered. His species, humans, were new to the galactic stage. They had only been discovered a few years ago, small, fragile, and from a planet that looked ordinary even by the lowest standards. Most of the great powers laughed at the idea of humanity being part of the convocation at all. What could they offer? No advanced weapons, no interstellar empire, no psychic gifts or biological upgrades, just endurance, and a history filled with wars, struggle, and stubborn survival. Across the table sat Mara Vare, a young diplomat from the Varkun Dominion. Her people valued intellect and status above all things. She had studied languages since she was a child, mastered alien politics by the time she was 20, and stood at the table today representing one of the most powerful empires in the known galaxy. And yet, as she watched Elias Rowe, she could not help but feel uncomfortable. The others whispered about him constantly. She could hear their comments, low and cruel. "Look at him, he doesn't even have translator implants," one alien delegate muttered, his translucent skin glowing faintly with amusement. "He must use that outdated vocal translator. Primitive," another said. A tall, four-armed being from the Arthal laughed. "Humans are odd. They smile when they are nervous. They talk too much. They die too easily." Mara looked at Elias. He sat quietly, hands folded, eyes forward. His translator device rested beside him, silent. The faint glow of the Earth emblem on his collar was almost invisible under the white light of the hall. When one of the senior delegates, a Varkun elder, spoke directly to him, his tone was cold. "Commander Rowe, perhaps you would tell us what value your people bring to this gathering." Elias looked up. His voice was steady, his accent crisp. "We bring perspective," he said. The elder tilted his head. "Perspective?" "Yes," Elias replied. "We come from a small world with no allies and no ancient wisdom. But we have survived everything our own world threw at us. We know what it means to begin with nothing, and to fight for every small victory." The hall was silent for a moment. Then someone laughed. Another followed. Soon a ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Even Mara felt a twist of embarrassment. His words had been simple, maybe too simple for a place like this. But Elias didn't flinch. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He only nodded once as if he had expected this reaction. When the meeting ended, Mara found herself standing beside him at the refreshment table. He was pouring a glass of something that looked like water, though it shimmered faintly blue. "You don't mind them?" she asked quietly. He smiled. Not the nervous smile others had mocked, but a small, genuine one. "I've learned that mockery loses power when you stop caring about it," he said. "And besides, I'm not here for them to like me." Mara tilted her head, curious. "Then why are you here?" He looked up at the grand ceiling, where the stars of hundreds of worlds glowed like tiny suns. "Because peace doesn't mean much if it only belongs to the strong," he said softly. "Someone has to speak for the ones who are still learning to stand." There was something in his tone that made Mara pause. It wasn't pride. It was conviction. Quiet, unshakable conviction. She had met countless diplomats, each skilled in rhetoric, flattery, and politics. But this human spoke like a soldier, like someone who had seen things he didn't want to remember. Before she could ask more, a sound echoed through the chamber, the booming gong that marked the end of the session. Delegates began to leave, still laughing, still whispering. As Elias moved toward the exit, someone blocked his path. It was a tall, silver-scaled being from the Tarvok Dominion, known for their cruel sense of humor. "So, human," the Tarvok sneered, "you survived your first convocation. Tell me, what does your tiny planet teach you about galactic diplomacy? Throwing rocks?" The laughter around them was sharp and cruel. Elias met the alien's gaze calmly. "No," he said. "It taught us how to survive when rocks were all we had." The Tarvok blinked, confused for a moment, and Elias stepped past him without another word. Mara didn't know why, but she smiled faintly. That evening, the convocation continued in the upper dome, a grand banquet of glowing drinks, floating music spheres, and endless speeches about peace and unity. The irony was not lost on Mara. Unity was always easier to talk about than to practice. From her table, she watched Elias again. He was alone, standing near one of the observation windows, staring out at the starfield. She noticed how still he was. Most species twitched, blinked, or shifted in nervous ways. But Elias stood completely calm, like a man waiting for something he couldn't see yet. Curiosity overcame her hesitation. She walked over. "Do humans always prefer silence over conversation?" she asked lightly. He turned, and there was that faint smile again. "Only when the conversation isn't worth having," she chuckled softly. "You're bold for someone whose species is being laughed at in every corner of this room." "Boldness," he said, "is often mistaken for desperation. But I think it's just hope in a louder form." She studied him closely. His uniform was plain black with a single patch on the left shoulder. She couldn't see it clearly in the dim light, but it looked like a circular emblem, blue and green surrounded by a ring of white stars. "What is that?" she asked, pointing. He glanced at it briefly. "Earth," he said simply. "Our home," she frowned. "You wear your planet's symbol? None of the others do." "That's because they have worlds so large they forget where they came from," he said. "We can't afford that." For the first time, Mara felt a small flicker of respect, not for his species, but for the calm certainty in his voice. The next morning, a storm rolled across SCIFI-Prime, not of wind or rain, but of tension. Rumors spread through the convocation halls. A rogue fleet was moving near the neutral zones. Whispers of an attack. In the middle of the discussion chamber, delegates shouted over one another. Some demanded to flee, others called for weapons. Elias sat silently at the end of the long table. His eyes moved slowly across the holographic display showing the incoming threat. When the speaker of the convocation tried to calm the room, no one listened. Panic was winning. Then Elias stood. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "If you keep shouting, you'll never hear what's coming," he said. The room fell silent. He pointed to the display. "That pattern, it's not a full assault. It's a test. Someone's watching to see how divided we are." The speaker frowned. "And what would you suggest, human?" Elias looked at the gathered faces, the same ones that had laughed at him hours ago. "I suggest," he said slowly, "you stop mocking the only species in this room that's been fighting for its life since it learned to walk." The silence that followed was heavy. Mara felt her pulse quicken. For the first time since she had met him, the quiet man from Earth wasn't calm. He was alive with something else. Not anger, not pride, something stronger, conviction. And in that moment, as the alarms began to echo through the chamber, Mara understood something very simple. This human wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to remind them what survival looked like. The next morning began with the usual calm. SCIFI-Prime's artificial sun glowed gently through the transparent dome above the convocation hall. Delegates were preparing for another day of debates, speeches, and long discussions about peace treaties. But something felt different. The air carried a strange tension, a quiet hum that made even the most confident voices sound uneasy. Lieutenant Mara Vare arrived early, her silver diplomatic badge shining under the lights. She walked past the great banners of the Allied worlds, their colors bright and proud, yet she could sense something unsettled among the guards and staff. They moved faster, speaking in hushed tones. As she entered the hall, she found Elias Rowe already there. The human commander was standing near the main display table, examining the large holographic star map that floated in the center of the room. The blue and gold lights reflected in his calm eyes. "You're early," Mara said as she approached him. "I don't sleep much before a storm," he replied quietly. She frowned. "A storm?" He nodded slightly. "Every diplomat feels peace in the morning. Every soldier feels the warning before it ends." Before she could reply, the great doors opened and the room filled with delegates. Voices rose, greetings were exchanged, and the convocation resumed its normal rhythm. Loud, proud, and full of confidence, the speaker of the convocation, a tall being with glowing crystal skin, began the meeting. "Honored delegates," he said, his voice echoing across the chamber. "We begin today with updates from the outer systems. Our peace fleet reports quiet in all sectors." But even as he spoke, the lights flickered. A single sound, sharp, electric, sliced through the hall. The holographic map trembled and distorted. "Technical glitch?" someone muttered. The map steadied for a moment and then changed. Now it showed a dark mass spreading across the border systems. Red markers blinked rapidly, one after another, until nearly a third of the outer rim was covered in warning signals. Mara felt her stomach tighten. "That's not possible," she whispered. The speaker blinked in confusion. "This cannot be correct. There is no known movement in that sector." Elias stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "It's a breach. Someone has entered your neutral zones without permission." The speaker looked at him sharply. "You mean an invasion?" Elias's jaw tightened. "No, not yet. This is scouting and a test." The delegates erupted into noise. Questions, arguments, accusations. The room became a storm of panic. "The swarm," one shouted. "They can't reach this far," said another. "Who let them through?" someone else cried. The speaker tried to calm them. "Order! We must not." Suddenly the lights went out. Darkness fell across the hall, followed by a deep hum from somewhere below the floor. For a few seconds no one moved. Then, emergency lights flickered on, washing the room in red. The communications officer, a small insectoid creature, looked up from the console. "All long-range channels are down. The outer defense grid isn't responding." "Impossible," the speaker gasped. "This station is protected by the Dominion fleet." Elias moved quickly to the nearest panel, typing commands on the glowing screen. His movements were fast, precise, confident. "They've jammed your frequencies," he said. "This isn't random. They planned this." Mara stared at him. "You seem very calm about this." He didn't look up. "Calm keeps people alive." He entered another command and a secondary display appeared, a smaller private network running through human-made tech. It showed the same red pattern, but now smaller details appeared. Ships, movements, numbers. He pointed at the nearest red cluster. "There, that's not a full fleet. That's a probe force, testing your shields. When they find a weak point, the real wave will come." The speaker turned pale. "Then we must evacuate. Get to the escape shuttles." The room filled with chaos again. Delegates shouted orders. Guards rushed toward the exits. Some tried to open private channels. Others demanded immediate protection. Elias's voice cut through the noise. "If you open those hangars, you'll expose the entire station." No one listened. Panic had already won. Mara tried to follow him as he moved toward the control deck. "What are you doing?" "Buying you time," he said simply. He reached the command terminal and began overriding the system locks. The console beeped in protest. "Access denied. Civilian authority required." Elias exhaled, then pulled a small metal device from his pocket, a human-coded override chip. It wasn't sleek or pretty. It looked old and scratched, but it worked. With a quick movement, he plugged it in. The console flickered, then unlocked. "Wait," Mara said. "How did you—" He gave her a small smile. "Humans aren't allowed to control alien systems. So we built our own tools just in case." Mara blinked. She had heard stories about human improvisation, how they could make machines out of junk, how they could adapt to any environment. But seeing it now felt different. "Commander Rowe," said the speaker nervously, "you have no authority to—" Elias looked at him. "You're out of time to worry about authority." He pressed several keys and the station's internal defenses came online. Turret systems activated, blast doors sealed, and security drones lifted from their charging docks. For a moment, the hall filled with a low, mechanical hum, not of fear, but of readiness. Mara turned to him. "You planned this." "I planned for what everyone else refused to imagine," he replied. Through the large viewport, she saw it, distant flashes of light outside the dome. The enemy ships had arrived. Not many, but enough to test their strength. "They're here," she whispered. Elias watched the displays. "This is only the beginning. They want to see how easily you panic." He tapped the console, activating a command channel to the station's defense crew. "All hands, defensive lockdown. Priority 1, shield integrity. No external launches. The alien guards hesitated. One of them asked, "And who are you to give orders?" Elias didn't answer. He simply walked to the center of the room, standing under the emergency lights. His voice was low, steady, but filled with quiet strength. "I'm someone who's seen fear destroy more than any enemy ever could," he said. "You can run or you can stand together. Choose wisely." For a long moment no one moved. Then one of the guards nodded. Another followed. Slowly the panic began to fade. Mara watched him, this quiet, plain human who everyone had mocked hours ago. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. He just acted, and people followed. Hours passed like minutes. The enemy probes tested the shields, sending small waves of energy strikes against the outer defenses. The station trembled slightly, but the systems held. Elias moved between consoles, checking energy routes, rerouting power, giving short instructions. Mara stayed beside him, translating alien systems and relaying his orders when others hesitated. At one point, she noticed something on his glove, a small, faded symbol. The same blue and green circle she had seen before. "The Earth emblem," she murmured. He glanced at it, then at her. "Yes, it reminds me why we fight. For survival, for the right to stand where others said we couldn't." The simplicity of his words struck her. No arrogance, no pride, only purpose. When the final probe withdrew and silence returned to space, the convocation hall was a different place. The laughter and mockery were gone. The delegates looked tired, shaken, but alive. The speaker turned to Elias, his tone softer now. "Commander Rowe, you may have saved this station." Elias shook his head. "Not yet. They were only testing us. They'll come again, and next time they won't stop." Mara studied him, her voice quiet. "Then what do we do?" He looked out the viewport at the distant stars where faint red lights still glowed. "We stop waiting for others to protect us. We prepare. Together." And as the emergency lights faded and the stars returned to their peaceful shimmer, Mara realized something she could never unsee. The human was no longer a curiosity in the corner. He was the calm before the storm, and the reason anyone survived it. The station's alarms had gone silent, but the tension did not fade. The once bright halls of the Grand Convocation now seemed darker, quieter, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Delegates who had once laughed and boasted now spoke in whispers. The scent of metal and smoke still lingered in the air from the brief power failures. Mara Vare walked through the hallways, her thoughts tangled. The words of Commander Elias Rowe kept echoing in her mind. "They want to see how easily you panic." She had seen panic. She had seen how quickly great leaders lost their calm when danger arrived. But she had also seen something else. A human who never raised his voice, never asked for help, yet somehow made everyone around him stand firm. Now the speaker had ordered a full emergency council. Every delegate was required to attend. Rumors spread like fire. Some said the swarm was regrouping. Others whispered that the Dominion fleet had refused to send aid. Fear once again was growing. When Mara entered the central chamber, she found Elias already there. He stood beside the large holographic display, studying the star map with deep focus. His dark uniform was now slightly torn at the sleeve, revealing part of his hand and the small, worn emblem stitched into his glove. It was a simple patch, a blue circle, with green and brown shapes inside it, surrounded by tiny white stars. It looked old, like it had been carried through years of use. Mara paused, staring at it. He noticed her gaze and gave a small smile. "Earth," he said softly. "The only home we've ever had. It's small," she said honestly. He chuckled lightly. "Most of the best things start small." She tilted her head, curious. "Why do you wear it even here among the stars?" He looked at the patch again. "Because when you travel far enough from home, you need something to remind you who you are." Mara nodded slowly. There was something deeply human about that, to carry a memory as a shield. Before she could ask more, the speaker entered, followed by the other delegates. The room filled quickly. Every face showed a different kind of fear: anger, worry, pride trying to hide uncertainty. The speaker began. "Honored delegates, our long-range scans confirm that the enemy has withdrawn, for now, but reports suggest they are regrouping in the outer zones. We have limited time to decide our course of action." An elder from the Tarvok Dominion stood, his silver scales glimmering. "We must retreat to the core worlds. We cannot risk another confrontation." Another delegate shouted, "Retreat? You want to abandon this station?" Soon the hall filled with arguments once more. Elias did not speak. He only listened, watching the display change as data updates arrived. Then, when the noise reached its peak, he quietly said, "You're all missing the point." The room fell silent again. He stepped closer to the hologram. The swarm wasn't trying to destroy us. They were watching, measuring how fast we break. The speaker frowned. "And what do you suggest, Commander Rowe?" Elias looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each alien leader. "You have fleets that can move planets, shields that can block meteors, and weapons that can erase moons. But you don't have unity. You depend on technology, not trust." The silence deepened. He continued, his voice calm and even. "On Earth we had no fleets, no great powers to protect us. But we learned something different. We learned how to fight together. We learned how to stand when everything else told us to fall." The Tarvok elder snorted. "Humans always speak in stories. You think courage alone can stop the swarm?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at the elder's reflection in the hologram. "No," he said. "But courage gives others a reason to stop running." Mara felt the truth in his words. She had seen it herself. When panic had taken the convocation, it was Elias who stood steady, and because of that, others had stayed. The speaker sighed. "Commander, your ideas are noble, but we need a practical defense plan." Elias nodded. "Then listen carefully." He activated a small side display. Blue lines spread across the map, showing sections of the station, hidden routes, and power nodes. "The enemy will strike again, but they expect us to run. We can use that against them. We turn this station from a target into a trap, not with weapons, but with coordination." Mara watched him as he spoke. His hands moved with calm confidence, tracing paths of strategy that no one else had thought of. He spoke not like a conqueror, but like someone who understood survival deeply. When he finished, the room was quiet. No one laughed this time. The speaker looked uncertain. "Your plan depends on timing and communication. If we fail to respond as one, we lose everything." Elias met his gaze. "Then don't fail." For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly the speaker nodded. "Very well, Commander Rowe. You will have temporary command over the station's coordination center." Several delegates looked shocked. Giving a human, a newcomer, such authority was unthinkable. But none of them protested aloud. They had seen what he could do when chaos came. As the meeting ended, Mara walked beside him through the corridor. The hum of the station's machinery was steady again, but the tension was still there. "You speak like someone who has done this before," she said. He gave a small smile. "Not quite like this. But back home we had storms that made us learn fast." "What kind of storms?" He thought for a moment. "The kind that make you realize you can't survive alone." Mara nodded, looking ahead. "And yet you are alone here." He looked at her. "Not anymore." The simplicity of his words surprised her, not because they were sentimental, but because they carried quiet truth. Later that night, as the artificial lights dimmed to simulate dusk, Mara found herself walking again to the command deck. The vast window showed the endless darkness of space, dotted with distant stars. Elias was there, standing near the glass, hands clasped behind his back. He was staring at the stars, silent as always. "You never rest, do you?" she asked. He turned slightly, smiling. "Rest is easy when the world is safe." She stepped beside him. "You really believe we can hold this place?" He nodded. "Yes, because we must." Mara sighed softly. "You make it sound simple." He looked down at the small emblem on his glove again. "It's not simple. But it's possible. That's enough." She followed his gaze, watching the faded colors of the Earth symbol. Something about it felt alive, as if it carried not just pride but memory. The memory of countless people who had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. "What does the emblem mean to your people?" she asked quietly. He took a slow breath. "It means we're still here," she smiled faintly. "That's it?" He looked at her, his eyes calm but fierce in a quiet way. "That's everything." When the first warning lights blinked red again an hour later, the hall came alive. The swarm had returned, not with full force but stronger than before. The test had become a challenge. Elias moved instantly, giving short, clear commands. "Seal the outer decks. Redirect power to the shields. Hold positions." Don't panic. Mara relayed his orders to the alien officers. There was no shouting, no confusion this time, only focus. The station moved like a single mind. The tremors shook the floor as energy waves hit the shields, but they held firm. Through the large viewport, flashes of light rippled across the void. The enemy was testing again, but this time the station did not flinch. Mara stood beside Elias, watching the readout stabilize. "Your plan is working," she said softly. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the display, but there was a small, quiet smile on his lips. "It's not my plan," he said. "It's our courage." She looked at him, at the emblem, at the steady hands, at the calm presence that had turned fear into focus. And for the first time, she felt something new, not fear, not admiration, but understanding. The mockery that once surrounded the human was gone. What remained was respect, earned not through power, but through strength of heart. As the alarms faded and the silence returned, Mara knew that this was only the beginning of something larger, because the moment she saw that small Earth emblem on his hand, she realized the truth. Humanity didn't come to conquer the stars. They came to remind them what courage truly looked like. The station was quiet again, but everyone knew it was not peace. It was the stillness before another storm. The swarm's second attack had failed, yet the warning was clear. They would come again, stronger and faster. Inside the grand convocation, the delegates no longer mocked or argued. The laughter that once filled the chamber had turned into focused silence. Maps floated above the tables, glowing with red and blue lines. Defense plans spread across the screens, and the voices that once competed for pride now spoke in cooperation. And at the center of it all stood Commander Elias Rowe, the human who had been ignored only days ago. He was now the quiet leader everyone turned to when decisions became heavy. He didn't wear rank or demand respect in a way. He simply earned it through calm and courage. Mara Vare walked beside him as they moved through the control deck. She had grown used to his way of speaking, short sentences but each one with weight. "You haven't rested in 2 days," she said. He gave a small, tired smile. "Rest is a luxury when time runs short," she frowned. "Even humans need to sleep." He looked at her briefly. "We'll sleep when the stars are safe." His words were simple, but they carried a strange power that made her chest tighten with emotion. She didn't know if it was fear, admiration, or both. They stopped before the main observation window. Outside, the darkness of space stretched endlessly, with faint lights flickering at the edge, signals of movement. "They're gathering," Elias said quietly. Mara followed his gaze. "How many?" "Enough," he replied. "More than before. This time they won't just test us. They'll strike to destroy," she swallowed. "And you still think we can hold?" He turned to her, his expression calm. "I don't think. I believe." The alarm lights flashed red again. The third assault had begun, every corridor filled with motion, guards running to positions, defense drones rising from hidden panels, power systems humming to full capacity. Elias stood in the center of the control room, giving short, clear instructions. "Sector 3 shields, full charge. Energy banks to secondary grid. Keep the upper decks sealed." His voice was never loud, but it carried authority. Even the alien officers, many older and higher in rank, listened without hesitation. Mara translated for those whose systems couldn't process the human language fast enough. She moved quickly, her voice echoing across the deck, relaying his orders. Through the wide viewport, bright flashes filled the stars. The swarm had arrived, dark shapes moving in perfect formation, their ships sleek and sharp like blades of night. They glowed faintly with crimson light, pulsing like a heartbeat. One of the young Varkun officers whispered, "They look endless." Elias heard him. Endless doesn't mean unstoppable. The words steadied the crew. The battle began with waves of energy strikes against the station's outer barrier. The shields glowed blue, absorbing the impacts, but each pulse made the lights flicker slightly. "Shields at 75%, called the systems officer. Elias leaned over the console. "Divert power from the secondary housing. We can lose light before we lose life." The officer nodded and obeyed. Mara turned to him. "They're focusing on one side of the station." He studied the pattern of attacks. "They're trying to break the defense grid's rhythm. If they open one section, they'll pour through like a flood." She frowned. "Then what do we do?" He smiled faintly. "We stop being predictable." He moved to a smaller console, an old human-designed control board he had installed secretly days before. It was simple, nothing like the advanced systems of the other species, but it was reliable. He tapped commands quickly. I'm redirecting the internal pulse grid manually. We'll give them a pattern they can't read. Mara's eyes widened. That's dangerous. You could overload the system, he nodded. Yes, but it might confuse them long enough to turn the tide. The speaker of the convocation appeared on the upper hollow screen. His voice trembled. Commander Rowe, the delegates are evacuating to the lower shelters. Can you hold the line? Elias looked up, calm as ever. We'll hold. The speaker hesitated, then nodded with respect. Then may the stars guide you, Commander. Elias smiled faintly. On Earth we guide ourselves. Minutes turned into hours. The station shook under the endless rhythm of impacts. The lights flickered, panels sparked, and the hum of machinery filled the air like the sound of a heartbeat growing faster. But the line held. Every time a section weakened, Elias found a way to reinforce it. Every time panic rose, he spoke calmly and simply. Focus on the next minute, he said, not the next hour. One step at a time. His words spread through the crew like quiet fire. Even when the power dipped dangerously low, no one ran. No one shouted. They followed his voice, and somehow that was enough. At one point, the control deck trembled harder than before. A small explosion of sparks burst from a nearby console. Mara stumbled, and Elias quickly reached out, pulling her back to balance. She caught her breath, looking at his hand. Rough, gloved, the faint emblem of Earth on the back. For a moment, time seemed to slow. That tiny patch, faded and old, somehow looked brighter under the red warning light. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a story. The story of a people who had faced storms, wars, and the darkness of space and had never surrendered. She whispered, You wear your world's courage on your hand. He gave a quiet smile. It's easier to carry than fear. Hours later, the swarm changed tactics. They began sending smaller craft to strike at weak spots, testing new angles. Elias noticed it immediately. They're adapting. Good, that means they're afraid. Mara blinked. Afraid? Yes, if they weren't afraid, they'd rush us. But now they're careful. That means we've already won half the battle. He issued new orders, and short and clear. Let them come closer. Then pulse the outer shield with double energy. When they're blinded, strike back with the reflection array. The alien officers looked uncertain. That's never been tested, one said. Elias replied calmly. Then it's time to test it. The command was executed. The outer shield glowed brighter, brighter, until it shone like a small sun. The attacking ships came closer, trying to penetrate it. And then the station released the pulse. A wave of pure light shot outward. It didn't destroy, but it disoriented the enemy. Their formations broke apart, the deck filled with gasps and shouts of surprise, not from fear but from hope. They're falling back. Someone cried. Elias nodded, his tone quiet but firm. Hold your fire. Let them retreat. Save your strength. When the alarms finally faded, the silence that followed felt strange, heavy, unreal. The stars outside were calm again. The red lights were gone. The crew looked around, stunned. No one cheered. They were too tired, too shocked. Elias exhaled slowly. Status? Shields at 40%. Power stable. Enemy retreat confirmed, an officer reported. Mara turned to him, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. We did it, he nodded slowly. No, you did it. Everyone here did. The speaker appeared again on the main display, his expression filled with awe. Commander Rowe, we are alive because of you. Elias shook his head. You're alive because you stopped running. The speaker bowed his head slightly. Perhaps that's what your people were meant to teach us. When the communication ended, Mara stood beside Elias near the viewport. The stars looked peaceful again, as if the battle had never happened. She glanced at him. You knew this would work, he smiled faintly. No one ever knows. We just believe. She looked down at his gloved hand again, at the small, faded emblem that had come to mean so much. You've changed how they see humans, she said softly. He looked out at the stars. I didn't come here to change anyone's view. I came here to remind them what it means to hope. Mara smiled gently. And you did. For a long time, they stood in silence, watching the quiet stars. Around them, the crew began to clean and repair. The hum of life returned to the station. Mara thought of how only days ago this same man had been laughed at, the silent human with no power, no status. Now he was the reason the convocation still stood, and she knew, deep down, that history would remember this day, not as a victory of technology or weapons, but as the day courage spoke softly and the galaxy listened. The battle was over. The stars outside the station looked calm again, their light gentle and distant as if nothing had ever happened. But inside the grand convocation, everything had changed. The halls that once echoed with laughter and pride were now filled with quiet footsteps and soft voices. Crews worked to repair the damage, fixing panels, recharging systems, and cleaning the marks left by the storm. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone, but beneath it was something new: respect. For the first time, every being on the station walked a little slower when passing the human commander. They didn't laugh anymore. They nodded. Small gestures of gratitude, silent words of thanks. Elias Rowe stood near the great observation deck, watching the stars. His uniform was still dusty and torn from the long night of battle. The emblem of Earth on his glove looked worn, but somehow brighter under the morning lights of CosmicAdventures. Mara Vare approached quietly. She carried a datapad filled with reports from the Council, but she knew he didn't care much about documents. "You're hard to find," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Not really. I just prefer quiet places." She stood beside him, looking out the same window. "You could rest now. The speaker says the threat has passed for the moment. You've done more than anyone expected." Elias's eyes stayed on the stars. "It's never really over, Mara. Peace always waits for someone to protect it." She tilted her head slightly. "You talk like someone who doesn't believe in rest." He chuckled quietly. "On Earth, rest comes when the work is done. Out here, I think the work has just begun." The speaker of the convocation soon arrived, surrounded by guards and aides. His glowing form shimmered softly in the new light. "Commander Rowe," the speaker began with warmth in his voice, "on behalf of every world represented here, I offer our deepest gratitude. Without your actions, this station and all of us would have fallen." Elias nodded politely. "You don't owe me thanks, Speaker. You owe yourselves courage. You found it when it mattered." The speaker smiled. "Perhaps, but you reminded us how." He stepped forward, extending a crystal tablet engraved with golden symbols. "By decision of the Council, Earth will now be granted full status as an allied world. Humanity shall have a permanent seat among the stars." For a moment, Elias said nothing. His eyes moved over the glowing letters, not out of pride, but reflection. "My people will be honored," he said at last. "We're small, but we learn fast." Mara smiled at his words. "And you teach fast, too." As the speaker left, Elias stayed by the window, quiet again. Mara turned to him. "You should be proud," she said. "Your world has joined the greatest alliance in the galaxy." He gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Pride isn't what we came here for. We came to understand, to build, to survive." She looked at him carefully. "Is that why you never gave up even when everyone mocked you?" He hesitated for a moment. "No," he said softly. "I didn't give up because I've seen what happens when people lose hope. Back home we face storms, wars, and darkness, but we always stand up again. That's what it means to be human." Mara nodded slowly. "Now I understand why your emblem means so much." He looked down at the patch on his glove. The small Earth, blue, green, and fragile, shimmered faintly under the light. "It's not just a planet," he said. "It's every person who ever looked up at the night sky and dreamed of more. It's a reminder that no matter how far we go, we come from a place that taught us courage." Later that day, the convocation held a ceremony to honor those who had stood against the swarm. The hall was filled again, but this time there was no arrogance, no mockery, only quiet respect. When Elias entered, every delegate stood. The speaker raised his voice. "Before this assembly stands a representative of a world once called small, yet whose heart proved greater than all. May the emblem of Earth remind us that strength is not found in power, but in unity and will." Elias didn't speak much. When they offered him the stage, he said only a few simple words. "Fear divides. Hope unites. We survived because we chose the second." The room fell silent. Even the translation systems paused, as if letting the words sink into every language, every heart. When he stepped down, Mara saw something rare: alien leaders bowing their heads to a human, After the ceremony, Mara and Elias walked through the gardens built within the station dome. The air was warm and full of faint light from the bioluminescent plants. For once, the hum of machines was replaced by soft music from the convocation's harmonics. "You could stay here," Mara said. "You could become an ambassador, a leader." He smiled. "Leaders are the ones who know when to leave," she frowned. "You're leaving?" He nodded slowly. "There are other stations, other worlds that need help. Earth doesn't have many ships, but we have people who won't stay quiet when others are in danger." Mara felt a strange sadness rise in her chest. She had grown used to his quiet voice, his steady presence, his calm during chaos. "You'll be remembered here," she said. He looked at her gently. "Then make sure we're remembered for the right reasons." That night, when most of the station slept, Elias stood alone once more at the observation deck. Outside, a transport ship waited, small and plain like the human who commanded it. He placed his gloved hand against the glass. The emblem of Earth touched the reflection of the stars. He whispered softly to himself, "We made it home to the stars." Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Mara. "You're really leaving," she said quietly. He turned to face her, smiling. "You'll do fine without me. You're stronger than you think." She shook her head lightly. "No, we're stronger because of what you showed us." He chuckled softly. "Then maybe humanity did its job." They stood in silence for a long time. The stars outside seemed endless, and yet for the first time they didn't feel cold or distant. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. He looked out the window one last time. "The stars are wide, but hope travels far. You'll see us again, maybe not me, but others like me. Humans always find their way back." Mara smiled faintly, blinking away the emotion in her eyes. "Then I'll be waiting." Elias nodded once, stepped toward the ship, and turned back only for a moment. "Keep the convocation strong. Don't let fear build walls again." "I won't," she said firmly. He smiled one last time. "Good. Then the stars are in good hands." The ship's engines hummed softly, lifting from the docking bay. As it disappeared into the darkness beyond the dome, Mara stood alone by the glass. For a long time, she stared at the small blue-green emblem still reflected faintly on the window. The mark of Earth, the symbol of courage. Weeks later, the convocation had fully recovered. The halls were brighter, the debates more peaceful, and the banners of each world hung side by side. But one new banner had been added, a simple circle of blue and green, surrounded by stars. Beneath it, engraved in many languages, were the words, "They came not with power, but with hope." And whenever Mara passed that emblem, she would pause and smile, remembering the quiet human who had changed everything with calm eyes, steady hands, and a belief that courage could be greater than fear. Far away, on the edge of another star system, a small ship drifted through the dark. Inside, Elias Rowe sat at the control panel, watching a distant world come into view. His co-pilot, another young human, asked softly, "Do you ever miss home?" Elias looked at the small patch on his glove. The Earth emblem, faded but strong. "Home," he said quietly, "is wherever we bring the light." The ship turned slowly toward the planet ahead, engines glowing against the blackness. And somewhere in the endless silence of space, the legacy of Earth continued. Not through conquest or power, but through courage, kindness, and the unbroken will of humanity.